Good afternoon to all. My name is Ambu Sharma. Today I will give you the basic ideas regarding the goods and service tax. Basically in India, there are two types of taxes are implemented. One is indirect tax and another is direct tax. When we are discussing about the indirect tax would be implemented on the goods and services. While we are categorizing the goods and services, there are several taxes are implemented on the goods like excise duty, custom duty, central sales tax, VAT, entry tax. These are the taxes which are implemented on the goods. While we are discussing about the services, the taxes which we are implemented on the services, that is your service tax. And another type of tax in India which are implementing, that is your direct tax. Direct tax, when we are dividing the categories of direct tax, it should be divided into different categories. There are several examples like income tax, wealth tax, other expenditure tax. These are the taxes on which we are implementing the direct tax. Now today what we are discussing what should be the basic concept of goods and service tax. What is the meaning of goods? What is the meaning of services? How the GST was implemented? What should be the historical background of GST? What is the way to implement the GST? Let us start from some historical background regarding the goods and service tax. There was a committee which is formed in the year 2004. The committee name is Kelkar Task Force Committee. In the year 2004, the Kelkar Task Force Committee recommended that there should be a uniform taxation was implemented all over India. That is called the Uniform Taxation System, Indirect Uniform Taxation System in India. On the recommendation of the Vijay Kelkar Task Committee Force in the year 2007-8, while Finance Minister P. Chidambaram presenting the bill in the Parliament Union Budget, he's saying that the GST was implemented in the year 2010, but because of some deadlines or uncertainties, the GST was not implemented in the year 2010. After that, again the GST get the momentum in the year 2014, and now the GST was implemented or will come into the effect from the 1st July 2017. What is GST? GST is the biggest reform in the indirect taxation structure in India. Let us start from some basic concepts. What should be the objective? The GST objective, there are several objectives behind to implement the GST in India. The first objective of GST is it is a user in single rate of tax. Second, that is the uniform tax across the country. Another, the most important point or the most important objective is reduce cascading effect of taxes. And the last is the principle of consumption-based taxation. These are the objectives of GST. First, there should be a single rate of tax. Suppose you are purchasing any kind of commodity and there are several rate of taxes that should be decided earlier in the GST. Suppose, let us take an example. If you are purchasing a mobile and the rate of GST was 18%, so whether you are purchasing from any state, you have to give the GST at the rate of 18%. That is called the single rate of taxation. Second is the taxation is uniform across the country. Wherever you purchase your commodities, the taxation rate should be uniform. And the most important is there should be the reducing cascading effect of taxes. That means, what is the meaning of cascading? Cascading means there should be that tax on tax. Before the implementation of GST, there should be a taxation system was implemented in India was value added tax. In the value added tax, what we are doing, we are giving the taxation on the value, whatever we are adding on the commodities. But in the cases of cascading effect, we are implementing the taxes on the what should be the actual value. Suppose you are purchasing a commodity of rupees 100 and you have to pay a tax of 10%. That means you have to pay rupees 110. Now you have, after 110, you are adding 10% more value. Then you have to give the taxes on the 10%, whatever the value you are adding, not the total value. So when you are giving the total value on the taxes, that is called the cascading. And this cascading effect was reduced after the implementation of GST. And that is the primary or the most important objective in the GST. And the principle on which the GST was worked, the principle the GST was work on the consumption based taxation system. It will work on the, it is basically GST was work on the supply in the state, in which state there should be the supply of goods or services. The tax was implemented on that particular state. That is why it is called the consumption based taxation system. So these are the objectives which should be fulfilled under the GST. Now we are moving to the next. Next is what are the important components of GST while we are discussing. GST was implemented in three several points. There should be CGST, SGST, and IGST. While we are discussing about the central CGST, that is called the Central Goods and Service Tax. It should be levy on supply of all goods and of services within a particular state by the central government. Another is SGST, that is the levy on supply of all goods or services within a particular state by the respective state government, that is called the SGST, and levy on all interstate supplies of goods or services, that is by the central government. While we are implementing the GST, we are implementing the GST on the basis of CGST and SGST and IGST. When there should be a supply within the state, if there are commodities or the services are transferring from within the state, then we are implementing CGST and SGST, that is called the Central Goods Service Tax and State Goods and Service Tax. When the commodities are transferring from one state to another state, not only the commodities, while we are discussing about the services also, then we are implementing the Integrated Goods and Service Tax, that is called the IGST. There is one type of GST is also implemented, that is called UTGST. UTGST, that is stands for Union Territories Goods and Service Tax. This is the structure, or we can say the components which we are implementing while implementing the GST. Suppose you are purchasing any commodity and you are paying the GST, then you have to divide that GST amount into the two several points if the commodity is within the state, that CGST and SGST. Suppose the rate of GST was 12%. Then you have to pay the 6% CGST and 6% SGST, that is called State Goods and Service Tax. Next, moving to the next slide, what should be the concept of CGST, SGST, and IGST? There are the possible rate of structure on which the GST was implemented. When we are discussing about there are certain exempted supplies, there should be nil rate, 0% supplies. When we are discussing about the zero rated supplies, export and supplies to SEZ, these are there should also be nil rate, or we can say that they are the zero rated supplies on which we are not implementing any kind of goods and service tax. There are several supplies on which we are implementing the tax at the rate of 5%. Another, there are several taxes on which we are implementing the taxes at the rate 12%. There are several supplies on which we are implementing the tax at the 18%. Another, there are examples, there should be supplies in which we are implementing the taxes at the rate 20%. So these are the tax structure, or we can say the possible tax slab which was implemented in the GST. Exempted supply, there should be nil. There are certain zero rated supplies, specifically that is related with your exports and the supply. And there are certain supplies in which we are implementing 5% GST, some commodities on which we are implementing 12% GST. There are certain commodities on which we are implementing 18% GST, and there are certain commodities on which we are implementing the 28% GST. Before, after the rate of structure, there should be important concept which we have to learn about the GST. Under GST, that is the concept of supply, because the GST was implemented on the basis of the supply of goods and services. Whether you are supplying the goods, it is the GST was implemented on the basis of supply of goods and services. So let us understand what should be the meaning, what should be the scope of supply. While we are discussing about the concept of supply, it should be clearly defined under section 3. There are certain in section 3, they are clearly defined what should be considered under supply. In the section 3, subsection 1, clause number A, there are all forms of supply of goods and services, whether it should be for any kind of consideration or whether in the course of furtherance, in the course or furtherance of business, like there should be sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, or disposal. All these forms of supply, they are all come under supply under the GST. According to GST, these are the different forms which we have to cover under supply. Like if there should be any kind of consideration, it should be in the monetary terms, it should be in the money value. And if there should be any consideration like you are further for the purpose of business or extending the business, and if there should be any sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease or disposal, these all forms are come under supply. Then the section 3 subsection 1 clause B suggesting that what should be the importance of service. Importance of service, there should be the services should be for any kind of consideration or whether or not in the course or furtherance of business. Then we are moving to the section number 3 subsection 1 clause number C. Supplies specified, they should be treated supplies made without consideration. There are some supplies in which we are not considering the supply, that should be specified in the schedule number 1. Schedule number 1, what we are suggesting, that schedule number 1 is suggesting there are certain supplies which is made without any kind of consideration. Like first, for example, there should be permanent transfer or the disposal of business assets for which you can avail the ITC availed. ITC, that is stands for input tax credit. In the second point, there should be the supplies that should be between the related persons and distinct persons in the course or furtherance of business. The related person is the person which are related with each other in any aspect. So they are known as the related person under the GST. If there should be a supply of goods by principal to an agent, then the importation of services from a related person or from any of his other establishment outside India in the course or furtherance of business. So these are the supplies that should be specified in the scheduled 1, and these supplies, it should be treated as a supplies made without a consideration. That means there should be a permanent transfer or disposal of business assets for which we have already taken the input tax credit. For we can take an example for the disposal or transfer, like if any employee is transferring any computer system to his employer, any employer is transferring his computers or laptops to his employees after the certain period of time on which the input tax credit is availed. So these are the examples, and there should be other some composite supplies and mixed supply. So these are the meaning and the scope of supply which we have to cover in the section number 3 subsection 1 clause A, subsection 1 clause B, subsection 1 clause C, and other supplies, composite supplies and mixed supply. What is composite supply? Composite supply is basically related where their commodities are naturally bundled. When there are two commodities are naturally bundled, then this supply is called the composite supply. Like for example, when you are purchasing any mobile phone, the charger, that is a supply that is called the composite supply. Right? Next is your mixed supply, that is related with what is the mixed supply? When you are any type of gift packs, the chocolates with cold drinks, these are the examples of mixed supply. Now we are next again meaning and the scope of supply. Supply is an important consideration. Why we are moving? Supply is comprising of including supplies, implicit supplies, exclude supplies, chargeability to tax, supply characterization, cases to consider. Supplies, what should be the supply is comprised? It should including the supplies. It should be implicit supplies that should be defined in the schedule 1, and in schedule 3 and 4 what we are going to the exclude supplies and chargeability to tax. Forward charge on supplier, reverse charge on imports, lateral charge, supply characterization, composite supply and mixed supply. Whatever the cases we are considering while we are doing the supplies, first, what should be the purpose of supply? So it should be for the business purpose or some other purpose or for any another purpose. So business or not, same form of supply apply to services. Supply by casual taxable person. ISD, that is your input service distributor or interbranch service transfer. There should be the intra-state stock transfer, free samples and warranty are supply for consideration. There should be the material supplied for job work. Schedule 2, not exhaustive but specific. No supply, no tax but no credit too. So these are the certain cases which we have to consider while we are making the supply under GST. But before this, we have to look into the section number 3, in which we have clearly defined how much the scope, what should be the meaning, how will you define, what should be the clauses from which you are defined, what should be the specified, and we are moving to the next. While we are comprising all the things, we have concluding what we have to include it, what should be the excluded supplies, excluded supplies क्या include करता है और include supplies हमारा क्या include करता है. Now, what are the various principles which we are determining supply as a interstate or intrastate? What should be the principles which we have to follow as a interstate or intrastate? There are two types of supplies, intrastate and interstate. जब हम interstate की बात करेंगे तो that is the supply intrastate within the state, और interstate की supply की बात करेंगे then it should be the state supply from one state to another state, from one location to another location. Like the chart is showing you the interstate or intrastate supply, and it is also showing what should be the way to implement the GST, like interstate supply, intrastate or intrastate. Let us first focus on the intrastate supply. Intrastate supply, that should be from one location to another location within the state. In this, we are implementing the dual taxation system, that is the CGST or SGST. Then registered office is not relevant, location of goods is relevant. And intrastate supply if from to one state to in one state. And right, we are discussing about the interstate supply. Interstate supply is from one location to another location, that should be from one state to another state. Then what we are implementing? We are implementing the tax that is called IGST, integrated goods and service tax. And there should be the, what should be the importance here? The importance is not the registered office, the importance is the moment of delivery. Even it is related with the stock transferable, taxable. Then imports, basic custom plus IGST. So that is the two types we are implementing in the GST. When there should be a supply within the state, then it is called the intrastate supply. When the supply is from one state to another state, that is called the interstate supply, from one location to another location. That is the intrastate or interstate. Up another aspect is what should be the supplier address, what should be the place of supply of GST registration is relevant or irrelevant, what should be the place of use of services. Let us think about what should be the GST on services. We are discussing in the previous slide what should be the GST was implemented on the goods, and when there should be the GST was implemented on the services, then what should be the role of intrastate supply and interstate supply. Intrastate supply, there should be the mention of the supplier address of GST registration. And interstate supply is basically related with the place of use of services or recipient address of GST registration. But the rate of GST was implemented in the same pattern. In the cases of intrastate supply, we are implementing the CGST or SGST, that is called the Central Goods and Service Tax and State Goods and Service Tax, and the place of use, that is relevant, where the commodity is consumed, where the commodity is utilized. If the commodity is utilized in the same state, then only you will implement the intrastate supply. If the commodity is used in the another state, then you have to implement the IGST, the place or use of services. It is basically related with the recipient address of GST registration, but the rate of GST was implemented in the same manner if the services are transferring from one state to another state and the place where the services are utilized, then it is called the interstate supply, and the rate of GST was implemented in the form of IGST, that is integrated goods and service tax. Let us understand some examples so it should be clear regarding your GST and IGST. Supply, supplier, place of supply, and results. Let us start. What should be the supply? Whether the supply is of goods, services, goods or services, goods or services. Who's the supplier? Where should be the place of supply? And what should be the result? Result means what should be we are implementing. We are implementing the IGST, CGST, SGST, or UTGST, that is called the Union Territory Goods and Service Tax. Let us take first example. There should be a supply of goods and the supplier state is Karnataka and the place of supply is Tamil Nadu. So you can easily identify that the result is interstate and the GST was implemented on the basis of integrated goods and service tax. Goods. Then the second example we can take services. Services, the supplier is in the state Pondicherry, the place of supply is Kerala. Again, you can easily identify that is the interstate and you can implement the IGST, integrated goods and service tax. Let us another example, the goods, the supplier is in Chandigarh, the place of supply is Chandigarh. So it is a interstate supply, that is called the interstate supply, and we are implementing the IGST because if the supplier and place of supply are same. In the third example, we are seeing that the supplier and the place of supply are same. Both are in the state of Chandigarh. Then why we are implementing the IGST? Why we are not implementing the CGST or SGST? So it is clearly defined that Chandigarh is a union territory without legislatory explanation. There are certain states provides the term states includes a union territories without legislatory. One of the 7 union territories, Delhi and Pondicherry, are the only union territories with their legislatory. There are certain rules which we have to follow in the union territory. Only Delhi and Pondicherry. In other union territories, the central government will governing. In case of unitary, if we are adapt the legislative of particular state, then it will be a intrastate supply. Then it should be called the intrastate. But in the cases of Chandigarh, it is a union territories without legislator. Then it should be implemented IGST. Next, we are taking the example of services. Supplier is in the Chandigarh, place of supply is Punjab. The result is interstate. The GST was implemented in the form of IGST, that is called the integrated goods and service tax. Again, we are taking another example. The supplier is in Punjab, in the place of supply is Chandigarh, then it is called the interstate, again integrated goods and service tax. Again the goods Delhi and the place of supply, then it is called the intrastate. There we have take the two examples from which we have very much clear where we have to implement the interstate or intrastate. In the case of where the supplier and the place of supply is in Chandigarh, we are implementing the interstate supply, that is called the integrated goods and service tax. But while we are discussing about the supply of goods within the state Delhi, like the supplier is in Delhi and the place of supply is also in Delhi, so that is called the intrastate. Why it is called the intrastate? Again, the explanation is given in the note. The explanation given in the section 2, subsection 2 provides that the term state includes a union territory with legislator. They have their certain rules or regulation. They have their own rules and regulation. One of the only there are 7 union territories in India. Only 2 union territories with their legislatory, and these legislatory with their own, that is Delhi and Pondicherry. That's why while we are supplier and the place of supply is same in the case of Delhi, we are implementing the intrastate, that is called the CGST and SGST, Central Goods and Service Tax or State Goods and Service Tax. Another example we are taking services, that is in supplier is in Rajasthan and the place of supply is also in Rajasthan. The result is intra-state supply, that is called the CGST and SGST we are implementing. Same state, the tax rate will be implemented in the form of CGST and SGST. While you are purchasing any commodities, while you are moving, suppose you are in the Rajasthan and you are purchasing any commodity, you are purchasing suppose an mobile phone from a store, then the GST was implemented at the rate of 18%. If you see the bill, it will showing that the GST was deducted on the basis of CGST and SGST. The CGST was 9% and the SGST is also 9%. They are divided in the same ratio. But while we are discussing about the IGST, it should be implemented at the uniform rate like 18%, then it should be the 18% should be deducted.